Secretary Shultz, as the president of the Environmental Law Institute, it is a great honor to be with you today as we have announced you and Tom Steyer as the 2013 award winner for our highest award, our Environmental Achievement Award. And watching us right now are hundreds of men and women who are all environmental professionals who have come together to honor you and Tom for what you have done. And so I want to talk with you, as you and I have already been talking about your involvement in environmental work, which has gone on for some time, and gain your insight as to things that might help us in the future. I am not going to go over your legendary career except to remind the audience that this is one of the great leaders of our lifetime, a man who has been a Marine. He has been
a Marine, sorry.
Is currently a Marine. Is someone who has been in several different administrations, one of the few individuals of our history who has been a cabinet secretary for 3 different cabinets and led the Office of Management and Budget as well. But with all of that, we're really honoring you for the work that you have done even more recently, advancing environmental progress in the state of California, working together with another individual to defend state actions. And so I would like to ask you about that, but I have to say at the outset, how did you get interested? How did you get involved in environmental issues in the beginning?
Well, I have a long history. When I was Secretary of Labor in 1969, suddenly I find myself chairman of a cabinet task force on the oil import control system. President Eisenhower thought that if we imported more than 20% of the oil we use, we were asking for trouble in national security terms. And that was obviously getting pushed. So this cabinet task force was formed, and I was the chairman. And we put out a really good report, published. And we said, the problem is really tensions in the Arab-Israeli situation where a lot of the oil comes from. That's what we had to worry about. So I ought to try to import less oil from there, more from Canada. And let's see if we can't save a little bit. And also let's have some storage in the ground and so on. Well, everybody, President patted me on the head, said, nice report. Or a congressional hearing, nobody did anything. A little while later, I'm director of the Office of Management and Budget, and President Nixon creates the EPA.
And did he create it with an executive order? Isn't that how EPA was formed?
I think so, although it was done on a broad base. I think there was broad support for what he was doing. It wasn't like he was trying to get around Congress. But at any rate, when a new agency is formed, they get money from other places and space and so on. And they don't exist, so if you're not careful, they're going to get all the dogs. So the director of OMB becomes their representative. And actually, we're pretty good representatives because the OMB knows where the bodies are buried. And nobody wants to mess around with us too much because we got too much to do. So we created the EPA, and some of the people who were involved had served as staff in that task force that I had been on, and they were very environmentally oriented, young people, bright, able. So I sort of got a little interest. So that's some of the early things. And then, of course, a few years later, I'm Secretary of the Treasury, and what happens? The Arab oil boycott. Just as we had said, this is likely. And so I could see the national security aspects of energy. I could see the economic aspects of energy. And I had earlier been exposed to the notions of the environmental aspects of energy. And something else impressed me. There was no energy department, so the Treasury was the energy department. People would come in And they had ideas about alternatives and saving energy and all kinds of things. And I thought they were interesting, and I tried to do what I could to encourage it. But a few years later, the oil prices go down, the crisis is passed, and all that stops. People lose interest.
But when
and then we've been on a roller coaster. Big crisis comes, people get interested in alternatives, crisis goes away, interest stops.
But when you were Secretary of the Treasury, did you create any energy offices within Treasury?
Yeah, well, we had to do it. There was no department, so I made my deputy, Bill Simon, who was a very energetic guy. I made him the energy czar, and we worked on it. And among other things, we thought there should be an entity in the government that's thinking about this subject and worrying about this subject. And eventually, the Department of Energy did come into being.
Can I turn you to your role as Secretary of State? Because during that time period, the Montreal Protocols came into being. And would you explain your role and whether or not the President was involved in that decision-making process?
Well, in the 80s, there got to be a growing number of scientists who said that the ozone layer was depleting. And there were doubters, there was debate, but I would say the bulk of them thought it was depleting. But they all agreed that if it happened, it would be a catastrophe. Nobody doubted that. And I was working with them, and our State Department people had a strong role in this. We had a very good EPA person involved. And we had good science, I thought. And I had twice a week private meetings with President Reagan. And so we talked about it. And he thought, and I thought, we better take out an insurance policy. So rather than have a big argument with the people who were doubters and make it into a big divisive issue, we said to them, in the back of your mind, there must be some little small voice that says, you could be wrong. So how about an insurance policy? So we got broad support for that idea. And so a negotiation proceeded. It was called the Montreal Protocol because it was signed up in Montreal. But it's also interesting that when the American creative enterprise system gets turned on and the scientific community gets turned on, things happen in the United States. In this case, the DuPont company came up with something to do. So we could not only get people to agree on objectives, we could say also everybody agrees to do this. And as it turned out, it worked. But as it turned out, the people who were worried were right. And the Montreal Protocol probably came along just in time.
And it's been highly effective.
But you got to remember, time is not necessarily on your side on some of these things.
Well, speaking of that very issue, we're honoring you and Tom Steyer for what you have done in California. But Secretary, you two are different. You're different generations. You're different political backgrounds. You're different. How did you come together? How did the two of you come together? And what were you trying to accomplish in California?
Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger called me. He was the governor. About this Proposition 23 that two dirty Texas oil companies put on our ballot in California, and asked me to co-chair an effort to defeat it. And I was in favor of defeating it, so I said yes. I said, who's my co-chair going to be? He said, well, we think it'd be good to have a Republican and a Democrat. I said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. So a man named Tom Steyer, who I didn't know, I knew of him a little. So I went up and we clicked. But I remember in our first meeting, we said, look, we don't want to just beat this thing. We want to beat the hell out of it. Because the way you really make a point is you have a large victory, a clear mandate from California. And we went about it carefully. We got both candidates for governor of California, Republican and Democrat, to be on our side. Meg Whitman and Jerry Brown. We got a lot of business support. We got union support. In other words, we had a coalition of people that was very broad-based. And we said, this is not about politics, this is about solving a problem. And so it was problem-centered, and actually, when the votes were in, we won by the biggest margin of anything on the ballot.
But that's not the way you started out, correct? I believe in the
way
beginning.
We started out, but we put on a hell of a campaign. There's another thing about what Tom and I did. We had a good time. I mean, politics is fun, particularly when you win.
Well, I had, talk about a good time. I remember looking at some of your advertisements that you used. Are there any of those that stand out that you thought were really good in your campaign?
No, the best one we had was a woman who was head of the American Lung Association. She looked like her mother, and she was saying to you, be careful about the air you breathe.
I want to go back into what you talked about with the Montreal Protocol for a minute and see whether or not that's relevant today. You said that you and President Reagan looked at the Montreal Protocol as an insurance policy. Is that relevant today in our discussion of climate change and greenhouse gas?
I think it's absolutely relevant. That is, there is a huge volume of opinion in the scientific world that our use of energy is causing the climate to warm up. There are people who are skeptics around. Personally, I'm convinced that it's happening. One of the most interesting is a video that I've seen of the disappearance of sea ice in the Arctic. It's about a 25-year period. It goes along very slowly, and then all of a sudden, about 10 years ago, it's suddenly, it's almost like the sea ice is being swallowed. So I think we have to worry about discontinuities. Or to put it a different way, we got to get going on this. And it seems to me we can say to people who are skeptical, look, shouldn't you take out an insurance policy? Maybe you're wrong. And the consequences are bad. And actually, the insurance policy isn't that expensive.
But I'm assuming that not everybody was in agreement on the Montreal Protocols. I'm assuming that there was different views and different parts about that. Do you have is there the experience of bringing that together that somehow is relevant today too? I mean, how did you make it happen?
Well, I think you make it happen. We had a very good negotiating team in the State Department. We had a very talented Foreign Service officer named Benedict who worked on it very hard, and he had all the stuff. And John Negroponte was the Assistant Secretary. He was a very able guy and worked at it. But the way you do a big international negotiation is you don't go to some city with 186 countries to negotiate something. You don't get it done that way. The way you get it done is you go to key countries and you work it out. And then once you've got a pattern, you enlarge the pattern. And then finally you've got, when the fix is in, so to speak, then you have the big meeting and everybody signs, and that's the way you negotiate something.
Obviously, the Montreal Protocol has been one of our most successful agreements.
Yeah, but also you work with our Congress and the Senate. And so we could go to them and say, look, here's the problem. We think we should have an insurance policy. What do you think? And here's what we're doing as we're going along. They were informed. So when it was negotiated, we really didn't have any problem getting it ratified.
You have been an outspoken advocate for research and development issues, and you're doing that here on the Stanford campus as part of your Hoover work. But why? Why are you promoting that? What is that? How does that help the discussion we're having right now?
I think it's the essential ingredient. It's part of the insurance policy. And the amount of money involved in the federal budget doesn't even come up to the rounding error. So right now, I think the federal budget that's going into real energy R&D is on the order of $5 or $6 billion. It ought to be at least double that, maybe more. But still, that's not large in federal terms. But a good effort like that draws private money. And here at Stanford and at MIT, where I'm familiar with those two, there's substantial private support for what's going on. But the things that people are learning how to do are significant. In the first place, there's a lot of effort going into how to use energy more efficiently. And a great deal of progress is being made. And you know that old saying, a penny saved is a penny earned? I mean, I'm a product of the 30s, I remember that. Well, a little bit of energy not used is earned, and it's very clean when you don't use it. It's the cleanest energy there is.
I remember.
So work on that is going on, and there's a lot of progress being made. Then I find the work on solar energy is very important and making huge headway. Actually, I have solar panels on my house on the Stanford campus. I've had them there about 6 years. And I have a little graph that shows my electricity bill before and after. And now the amount of money I've saved pays for the cost of the installation plus the opportunity cost of the money. Well, and I'm driving a little electric car around, so I figure I'm driving on sunshine and it's free.
Oh, I have another solar question, though. You gave me one saying, a penny saved is a penny earned, but you've actually reminded me of another saying, and that is, once a Marine, always a Marine. And so I want to know, as a current and former Marine, are there Marines doing anything in this solar area that our audience...
I wish you would stop referring to me as a former Marine.
As a might. Well, that's because I'm a former Special Forces officer. So, but anyway, tell our audience, are there Marines doing things with solar?
Well, the Marines over in Afghanistan, in Iraq, so on, we Marines like to be light, quick, move. And over time, with all this electronic stuff that comes along, your backpack gets heavier and heavier. And you've got stuff that needs batteries. And so what the Marines have invented is a little thing that you can hold in your hand like this. It's not heavy. And you flip it open. It's 12 solar panels with a little place in it. And you can those things to recharge all your stuff, so you don't need that much battery. So it's energy created where you use it. And I think we're going to have to pay a lot more attention to that in general in our society, because our grid is so vulnerable. It's vulnerable to cyber attack, but it's also vulnerable to lots of natural things that come along. So the more we can figure out how to create energy where we use it, the better off we're going to be.
Mr. Secretary, you were recently in Washington, and one of the things that you said when you were talking about some of your proposals was that if President Reagan was still leading our country, he would be supportive of carbon tax. But what were you proposing then? What were your ideas of moving the country in various categories?
Well, I shouldn't have said that, because I'm careful. I mean, you can look at what President Reagan supported. He supported the Montreal Protocol. Actually, he loved his ranch, and he worked in the outdoors. And you find people who work in the outdoors a lot are concerned about their environment. But I think one of the aspects of an insurance policy, I'd mentioned support for energy R&D, and I think another one would be to say, let's put all forms of energy on a level playing field. Why shouldn't every form of energy bear its full cost and compete fairly then with other forms of energy? And to do that, they should bear the cost of the pollution that they create, the carbon. So I propose a revenue-neutral carbon tax. I make it revenue neutral so it's not a drag on the economy. It's not a means for raising money. It's for the sole purpose of leveling the playing field. And I think if we did that, it would help a lot in getting where we want to go. So if you combine that with energy R&D, of a good sustained nature, I think you've got a big piece of that insurance policy.
In Washington, as you well know, the federal government has been unable to craft legislation that would reduce greenhouse gas, but states have done things, and in particular, the state of California has been doing those things. How do you see that? How do you see the role of California in this progress that we all hope will occur?
Well, a lot of important things happen in this country from the bottom up. And in California, people are very concerned about their environment. The vote shows that we referred to earlier. We're kind of nutty. We actually care about the air we breathe and stuff like that. How nutty can you get? But anyway, California is environmentally conscious, and we've taken certain steps. And people say, well, who do you think you are? California can't solve this problem. But I think it may very well be that in the end, this problem is going to get solved from the bottom up. That is, people in a small enough community that can actually decide something and do something will be taking steps. And there are actually a lot of different states in our country that are actually doing things now. And there are units in other parts of the world that are doing things. And gradually this can build up. And also, if we can manage to do these things in a reasonably sensible way, so we don't have a lot of downsides to them. There are always some extra costs, I admit that. But if we can do it in a reasonably sensible way, then you provide an example. You can say, yes, you can do it. Look, here it is, and it works. And the result is positive.
So you know that the Environmental Law Institute is a bipartisan organization that has a wonderful international reputation, but we try to bring diverse parties together to accomplish things for the a common good, and we're well known for that. And that's what you and Tom Steyer have done, being diverse parties and come together. But things aren't always working that way in Washington. Are there lessons that we can learn from what you and Tom have been able to accomplish in California of putting aside political issues and really looking at problem solving?
Well, I think that there are steps involved. Get people to think, yeah, there is a problem. And the problem is the problem. Now, are there solutions? What are they? Are there any examples? And can we do something about the problem? Sometimes people describe problems as they're sort of out of control and there's nothing you can do about it. It's very important when you get people convinced there's a problem to be able to say, yeah, there are things you can do, so let's do ABC. And if there are some examples you can point to, it isn't just my imagination here. I can say, look, over there, they're doing it. And look how things are happening.
So right now, Mr. Secretary, you can tell that we are using you and Tom Steyer as our example of why people matter and how things can be done. But you understand now that you and Tom have become citizen activists. But is there a role for the average member of the public right now in this complicated area?
Absolutely. Ronald Reagan gave me a tie when I was working with him, even before the primaries way back. And the tie had on it, democracy is not a spectator sport. So I should have worn that tie today. I wear it often because it's making a very profound and nonpartisan point, namely, get in and participate. Work at the issues. Try to understand them in a responsible way and identify problems and be ready to work at them with whoever comes along and looks like they are ready to work with you in a sensible, decent way.
It is a very much an honor for me to be here and present with you, and it is in fact very important because we are able to have this conversation with many of your friends and admirers who've assembled to hear some of the words and the history and the application of that history to our current events. And so I have only one last question for you, and that is how you see the future. Are you optimistic about things that we might be able to accomplish despite the challenges that you have recognized?
Absolutely. I'm very optimistic about America. We've had big problems before. We solved them. We've always done it. And we were talking about Ronald Reagan. You know, when he learned that he had Alzheimer's disease, it was about 10 years before he died, he wrote all of us, his beloved American people, he wrote us a long letter, you may remember it, in his own handwriting. And the last two sentences of the letter were, "I now begin the journey into the sunset of my life. But for America, I know there will always be a bright dawn ahead." So I'm with him. There is a bright dawn ahead.
Mr. Secretary, we're honoring you today because you have, in fact, done that your entire life. And what you have done for America, I believe, is create a bright dawn of our future. Sir, thank you very much, and congratulations for the 2013
Thank you.
Environmental Law Institute
I'm
Award.
very honored to receive this award. Thank you.